It's interesting, there are Muslim burials here in Seattle. There's a cemetery at the north end of Queen Anne Hill. I forget the name of it. Kind of overlaps Seattle Pacific University. In the far northwest corner of that cemetery is a Muslim section. And if you look at it, the cemetery, the graves up there are kind of on an east-west grid. Let's see. Well, yeah, east-west grid kind of thing. It runs along. If you look at the Muslim cemeteries, because they do have headstones, and many of them are in Arabic script, but not all of them, the headstones are at a slant to it, and consistently. Well, there's a reason for that. When you're buried in a Muslim grave, this is part of the enchantment, I guess, a Muslim grave, you're buried on your side with your face toward Mecca. That's proper. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, Makkah, they say, is to the east. Well, yes, it's to the east, but that's not the shortest route. The shortest route is the same route British Air flies from here to London, and from London down onto Dubai and to South Africa. It's over the pole and down the other side. And they even have little calculating devices, so anywhere in the world they can figure out the longitude and latitude and stuff and point the grave in the right direction. So all those headstones up there are facing that way, because that is, in fact, the shortest route to Mecca is over the pole. If you're going to the east, you're going to take a long route around the Atlantic and the Azores and all this kind of stuff. We don't have to do that kind of thing. So it's very distinctive. And I remember in Pakistan, I was told something that was very interesting. That I'll add one more little detail to this one. I was told that sometimes the grave was dug, and then when it was down, whatever it is, 4 feet or something, there was a shelf dug sideways in, and the body is put in the shelf, on the shelf facing Mecca, and then the grave is filled in. And I said, well, why is that? Now, do you know what jinns are? Jinns? Jinns are little spirits in the Muslim world which are all around us all the time. And you and I each have one. And a jinn that sits on the left-hand shoulder is whispering things in our ear, telling us to go ahead and enjoy ourselves and do things we shouldn't do. The jinn, does this sound vaguely familiar? Sits on your right shoulder and tell you what the proper thing to do. Is that what your mother would want? You know, blah, 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 kind of stuff. Because the left side, in particular the left hand, in Islam is disfavored for good reason. We will go into that. It has to do before the invention of toiletry. So the left-hand jinn is sitting there, and I was told, well, the jinns will be watching when the grave is dug. But you know, the jinns, this fellow told me, the jinns really aren't too smart. And if you push the body over on the shelf and fill in the grave, they look in there and they can't see it. And they don't know it's there. And so they'll leave it. That's so much for the jinns. So that's another great example of how things become enchanted, I think. Are there any comments? Can I tell you about one more practice that people in other parts of the world that we're starting to do that people find appalling? Physician-assisted suicide, which is now legal in Oregon and Washington. For the last 5 years, I have been invited to speak to a group of Japanese medical students who come to the UW every summer for a week with their instructors. There's about 20 of them. And they get a tour of UW Hospital, they go to Harbor View, they go to Swedish, because the idea is part of their medical education in Japan is to find out how Western hospitals work. Although the hospitals in Japan are some of the tops in the world. We should be sending students there. But they come and they sit down and they have conferences with physicians and nurses who talk about how things are done in this country. Green, the anthropologist, is always invited in to talk about physician-assisted suicide. And we do it in a little conference room down in Health Science in the Department of Medical Ethics. And it's usually done through a translator from the Japanese embassy here. Although some of them, their English is pretty good, but most of them, they just have a smattering. So I go through the whole routine about physician-aided dying. And these students are absolutely appalled that we would do that kind of thing. That we would allow people to elect to end their lives. Because in Japan, that is just simply not allowed. You end your life peacefully. You end it with the help of drugs, if necessary, for you, so that you're not in pain. And your life is ended when you stop breathing and your heart stops. That, by the way, is not the definition of death in this country. Death in this country is defined as brain death. And so your heart could still be beating. And you could still be breathing on your own, but you could be brain dead in a persistent vegetative state. And they hear this story about how we now do it in Oregon, Washington, and I think this is going to spread, whether you agree with it or not. And these students are just amazing. And one of them said to me once, because then they always have a nice dinner over the faculty club. They get the best Japanese restaurant in town to come in and cater this thing. The women are all dressed in their kimonos. It's just, you just feel ashamed we dress the way we do. It is so nice. And one of them said to me, you know, you Americans, first it's this embalming, and now it's physician-aided dying. What's with you people anyway? I mean, he was just curious. What's with you? Why do people do this in this country? Well, because for the same reason people do things in his country. Long traditions, political histories, struggles to define what's correct. It's just, they've got their traditions, we've got ours. But I think they all fit into Harriet's little diagram in some way. Any more comments? Questions? Yeah.
So when you were talking about in India where they're starving themselves and not drinking any water, isn't it in a way that's sort of resistant to suicide? I mean, even if they're going to die, that's going to shorten their lives. So, I mean, I don't know. I see a similarity there almost to.
Well, there is a similarity there in a certain sense. Certainly in the sense that people in states where assisted suicide is not legal, and that means 48 of them, will voluntarily end their own lives by dehydration and non-eating. And it's the dehydration that's going to do you in. That is a terribly painful death. And it takes an enormous amount of determination to do it. I think the difference, though, is, I mean, this goes back to culture. I think the difference is in the reading of it. In the Indian example, austerities, extreme austerities, are regarded as the height of piety and of being a religiously dedicated person who in the next life is going to carry some awfully good karma. Whereas in this country, the same behavior is an act of desperation. I can't get my doctor to do me in. I'm not strong enough to use a gun. I can't get fatal drugs for myself. I'll just starve myself and dehydrate myself. So it's an act of desperation. It's the cultural take, even though you're right. They're very similar actions in terms of the body, but it's what those actions mean. Great piety versus, in a certain sense, a certain rebellious spirit. Screw you all. If you won't help me, I will help myself in the only way I know. And it's an act of desperation. Yeah.